And good afternoon and welcome back. This is Thursdays with Charlie, episode number 48. My gosh, we've come a long, long way. And it's the 15th of April, 2021. Income tax day normally, but they've given us an extension until May automatically for everybody, I understand. And looks forward to that being a later in the month of May to worry about something. But it is Income Tax Day. More importantly, though, on Monday of this week, April the 12th, was the birthday of Father Garces. Father Garces was born on the 12th of April in 1738 over at a little village in Spain. He was baptized on the very next day, the 13th of April, 1738. They didn't waste any time at all in getting their child baptized back then. Father Garces, while we celebrated his birthday on the 12th, we celebrated his baptism on the 13th, I also this week on the 13th was asked to offer a prayer at the Laughlin Town Board meeting, and it was on the 13th. And so I took advantage of the occasion and decided I'd talk a little bit about Father Garces, and I'd mention his birthday and his baptism, and I also used one of his quotes for the town board meeting. And I'll share that quote with you. I think I've shared it before, but it was particularly good when you're talking to an advisory body, a governing type body in our town of Laughlin. Patience is essential, and not being afraid. For without patience and resolve, little will result. Kind of a good thought over there. Patience and resolve. Take your time and be determined, and good things will result. Also had another nice thing happen. Not only was it the anniversary of Father Garces' baptism on the 13th, but I received a package of dirt. Now, I know that doesn't sound terribly exciting to many people, but I had requested some dirt from the San Xavier del Bac mission in Tucson. That's the mission to which Father Garces was assigned in 1768 until about 1777. And so during those years, Father Garces was at San Xavier del Bac, but it was also during those years that he did his travels. And of course, during one of those years, 1776, he visited us here in Laughlin. So I was determined I wanted something from that mission that I could trace back to Father Garces. And so I contacted the Franciscan superior there, Father Bill Minkel. And I asked Father Bill, I said, is it possible that I could get some dirt from the mission, perhaps from an area of the mission that would have been around at the time of Father Garces? The current church was not there in Father Garces' time, but the foundations were. And Father Bill was amazing. He was really good to me. And he said, sure, I'll take care of that. And on the 13th rather, I received a whole box of dirt with a beautiful letter from Father Bill saying that the dirt had been taken from the old cemetery at the mission, which would have been the cemetery at the time Father Garces was the priest there. So Father Garces would have buried people, walked in this cemetery, and been well aware of its existence. So the dirt that I have and I received is dirt from an actual area of the mission, the cemetery, that was in use at the time of Father Garces in the 1760s, 1770s. And so we have it. It's going to be one of our displays in our Garces Center when I get it packaged and labeled. So we'll look forward to that. But it was a nice bit of history, and I thought it was interesting that it would arrive at my hands on the anniversary of Father Garces' baptism. Now, in the past several weeks, we've had a lot of beautiful religious celebrations. Of course, those of Holy Week and Easter were magnificent. We had a lot of people. We had almost 500 people joining us in person and several hundred more joining us virtually for the Easter event, the Easter Masses. And then the following week, last Sunday, we celebrated the Divine Mercy devotions. Divine Mercy goes back to Sister Faustina in the 1930s, a Polish nun who had visions of Jesus. And in the visions, she saw Jesus in a particular way. You can stop by our church. We have a huge 5 or 6 foot high image of what she had seen. And the unusual thing about the image of Jesus was not only that it was a particular image of him, but that there were words attached to it. Jesus, I trust in you. That's essential to the vision and the message of divine mercy. Jesus, I trust in you. That's also printed on our image. If you stop by church, you can see it. And Sister Faustina, as it turned out, wrote her visions down in her diary, became known as the Diary of Sister Faustina. At the same time, in Poland, growing up, was a young man who was destined to become Pope John Paul II. And he was familiar with the writings and the words of Sister Faustina. And so he was able to bring them to light in the larger church. And that was beautiful. And it was Pope John Paul II, now St. John Paul II, who also became the one who officiated for the canonization of Sister Faustina as Saint Faustina. So we owe the Divine Mercy devotions and Divine Mercy Sunday to both the Diary of Sister Faustina and to Pope John Paul, now St. John Paul II. We celebrated them beautifully here. Deacon Dan has a particular devotion to the Divine Mercy image and to the Divine Mercy message. Last time in the show, I tried two different types of peeps. There was chocolate pudding peeps, which I associate peeps with Easter very, very much, and there was hot tamale peeps. Since then, I've received some other bits of candy. One is cinnamon swirl peeps. I'm not going to eat them on the show. I'm going to save them for later, but it is kind of an unusual bit of peeps. And then someone actually found bacon jelly beans. Those are going to be, I think, a special treat, and I'll try them later on today, but I think I'll keep a bowl handy in case other people want to get the wonderful taste of bacon and the wonderful texture of a jelly bean at the same time. Those were unique little gifts this Easter. Occasionally we get questions on our Facebook page, and this week we got some questions about Mary. And perhaps, there are questions that other people have as well as the person writing them. Why do we speak of Mary or the Blessed Virgin Mary and not speak of Saint Mary, like we do speak of Saint Joseph, Saint John the Baptist, and all the other saints? And that was followed up with some other questions about Mary, like the miracles of healing at Fatima and Lourdes. Are they Mary working miracles, or is something else going on over here? So I thought I'd take the time and do a little talk. Mary's month is the month of May, and that's coming up in a few weeks anyway. So let's just concentrate on Mary. The first part, why do we speak of Mary as the Blessed Virgin Mary, and we don't just say Saint Mary like we do for all the other saints? And the short answer to that is Mary is not just one of all the other saints. She's got a very special place in salvation history as the mother of Jesus. She's even known as the Theotokos, the mother of God. We speak of her. We don't do that for any other saint. So while there is some people who speak of Mary as Saint Mary, and there are certainly churches dedicated to Saint Mary, and they honor her that way, but she's more commonly known as a unique figure in salvation history. So the Blessed Virgin Mary, or simply Mary, the Mother of God, or Mary, the Mother of Jesus, is perhaps why she's known better. She's not just one of the other saints, even though she is one of the many saints of our Catholic Church. As far as the miracles of healing at shrines like Lourdes or Fatima, my favorite shrine of Knock even, or other places in the world, Mary is always an intercessor with us to Jesus. She's never the one who works the miracle. Only God can work miracles. But Mary is an intercessor, a figure between us and God, who brings our petitions, our needs before the throne of God the Father. And certainly because of her relationship with Jesus, she has a special place in doing that and has a special efficacy in doing that as well. If you go back in our history of the church, there was a time not too long ago, about 2 centuries ago, when there was a feeling within the church that Mary should be considered the co-redemptrix with Jesus. And that actually gained some traction among theologians. But in the end, the theological opinion was that there is only one Redeemer, Jesus Christ. Mary is very closely associated with Jesus, but she is not part of the redemption in the way that Jesus is. So the term co-redemptrix is something that we do not use in terms of Mary. It's interesting, though, if you compare the life of Jesus and the life of Mary, there are some interesting comparisons. When Jesus was assumed into heaven, we speak of the Assumption. We even celebrate it as a holy day. In our part of the country, we actually put it on the 7th Sunday of Easter, so everybody can celebrate it. And in Mary's life, there's nothing in the scriptures that speaks about Mary being taken up into heaven, but there is a theological belief that Mary was assumed into heaven. Jesus ascended, so we celebrate the ascension, but Mary was assumed, so we celebrate her assumption. That's a theological belief. It's a matter of faith that Mary's body is not here on earth, it's in heaven. But unlike Jesus ascending by his own power, Mary, as we speak of her assumption, she was taken up to heaven by the power of God when the course of her earthly life was finished. There's even some comparisons between the birth of Jesus and the birth of Mary in that we celebrate both of their birthdays. We don't do that for any other saints except for St. John the Baptist. We celebrate Jesus' birthday on Christmas. We celebrate Mary's birthday on September the 8th. We celebrate John the Baptist's birthday on June 24th. But all of the other saints, we don't remember necessarily their birthday. We remember the day they entered into heaven. So if, in the case of a martyr, it would be when they were put to death. In the case of some other saints, it's usually the day they died and achieved eternal salvation. But we do celebrate the birthday of Jesus and the birthday of Mary. There's a lot of things that they're combined with. We speak of the sufferings of Jesus. We speak of the sorrows of Mary. The Rosary, while it's a prayer honoring Mary, is also a prayer that guides us through the life of Jesus. And so their association with one another, Mary, the Mother of God, and Jesus, the Son of God, we're certainly always considering them together, so very, very much. There is an interesting, we were talking about Lourdes and Fatima, and everybody knows about Lourdes and Fatima, but there's a place that I learned about in recent years that many people, I think, are unfamiliar with. But we do have some snowbirds who come and visit us from Iowa. And there's a place in Iowa, West Bend, Iowa. And in West Bend, Iowa, there's a shrine, and it's called the Shrine of the Redemption. And it has a really very interesting story. It's also known as the Grotto of the Redemption. And a grotto is like a cave-like figure in which someone would appear or something would be kept or something would be seen. We speak of the grotto at Lourdes or the grotto at Fatima, a background in which Mary appeared. Well, in West Bend, Iowa, a very interesting story, there was a priest, Father Paul Dabenstein. And Paul Dabenstein was ordained in 1897 in Milwaukee. And he was assigned, at the time those dioceses stretched over quite larger areas, he was assigned to a parish of Saints Peter and Paul in West Bend, Iowa in the following year, 1898. And he was the pastor in that parish, Saints Peter and Paul in West Bend, Iowa, until 1954 when he died. He was almost 57 years in the very, very same parish. And there's a story that Father Paul, when he was in the seminary in the late 1800s, contracted pneumonia. And he really prayed and prayed to God. And he prayed that he would be healed of the pneumonia so that he could continue and be ordained and do the work of a priest. He was cured of the pneumonia. He got through it, and he never forgot that promise. And so after his ordination in 1897 and his assignment in West Bend, Iowa in 1898, he began to want to fulfill the promise he made, and the promise was that he would build a shrine wherever he was assigned. And the shrine would be a place of prayer, a place of refuge for people. And the shrine began in 1912, and it was still being worked on up and through 1954 when he died. It was done by a lot of volunteers. It was done by a lot of people who visited and contributed either finances or other resources or time or talent to it. And it is now a huge, beautiful shrine honoring the life of Jesus and the life of Mary. One of my friends happened to visit the shrine over there and brought me back a souvenir from it. This is actually a replica of one of the grottos at the shrine. And there were many of these grottos dedicated to the events in the life of Jesus or events in the life of Mary, scattered over a huge bit of land. The shrine is open 24 hours a day, even though a lot of it is outside, but it is well lit and you're able to visit it. So if you ever have a chance to be in Iowa, it would be an awesome thing to visit the Grotto of the Redemption in West Bend, Iowa. Well, that's a beautiful place of images. My favorite image of Mary is Our Lady of Perpetual Help, sometimes known as Mother of Perpetual Help. We actually got these prayer cards and we mailed them out to our parishioners this week, so you should have one in your mail. If by chance you don't, or if you would like another copy of this image, we will have them at church over the weekend, and we certainly encourage the spreading of it. The image of Our Lady of Perpetual Help, also known as Mother of Perpetual Help, or Our Lady of Succor, Succor, Our Lady of Help, has a long and interesting history. It's done in the style of an icon, an Eastern image with a lot of gold overlaid on it. It's interesting because it shows the child Jesus in Mary's arms, but he doesn't really look like a baby. He looks like a much older person, but the size of a baby in her arms. And then if you look at the image in the upper left-hand corner, you can see St. Michael, the Archangel, in the upper left-hand corner, and St. Gabriel, the Archangel, in the upper right-hand corner. And St. Michael in the left-hand corner is holding the spear that pierced Jesus' side. He's holding the wine-soaked sponge that was pressed to Jesus' lips. And he's holding the crown of thorns that was placed on Jesus' head. In the right-hand corner, St. Gabriel is holding the cross and the nails that held Jesus to the cross. It's a very interesting image. Again, the iconic style, but also it's representing the images of Jesus' passion. And so in many minds, it's Jesus as a child contemplating the work of redemption that would take place later in his life. Looking at it, it actually was painted on wood, and it was painted probably during the 1200s. The wood piece is about 21 by 16 inches, so it's not a very large painting to begin with. It showed up on the island of Crete in the 1300s, and towards the end of the 1300s, it was brought to Rome, and it was entrusted to the Church of St. Matthew in Rome. During the 1800s, it became known as St. Matthew's Madonna, because that's where it was located. When Napoleon came in and sacked much of Rome, the Church of St. Matthew was destroyed, but the image of our Mother of Perpetual Help was protected and it was eventually moved to the new church of St. Alphonsus Liguori that the Redemptorists constructed. And in 1866, Pope Pius IX assigned the image specifically to the Redemptorists. And so the Redemptorists are kind of in charge of the image. They promote the novena to our Mother of Perpetual Help. And there's two interesting stories that I have that go with that. One is my own parents. My parents made a novena on Tuesday nights in 1947 to Our Lady of Perpetual Help. I like to think that somehow I'm sort of a result of that novena in there, but they bought an image of Mother of Perpetual Help, and I have that in my house. That's one of the reasons why I'm very fond of the image. I've always thought that if I were ever going to name a church, not that I'd ever have that power or permission, I would love to name it in honor of our Mother or Our Lady of Perpetual Help. It's a gorgeous image. The other story is when I was in the seminary in the 1960s and early 1970s, one of my friends that I met at a conference of seminarians was a young seminarian named Gary Lowenstein. And Gary was a member of the Redemptorist order. So he was going to the Redemptorist seminary in Esopus, New York, and I was going to the diocesan seminary in Mahwah, New Jersey. But occasionally there'd be a conference for seminarians and we would meet, and we became very good friends. One of the interesting differences we found in our lives was the diocesan priests were never under any vows of poverty, chastity, obedience. We kind of pledged that we would be chaste and that we would be obedient and that we would not be ostentatious with our money. But it was no vow. The Redemptorists, and Gary being a part of that, lived the life of a vowed religious, vowing poverty, chastity, and obedience. In the interest of poverty, they did not receive a salary or a stipend or anything. They were given money as they needed it if it were available. I was more in charge of my own money. So even as young seminarians, we saw that difference in our lives. We would talk about which was better, which was more educational, which was more spiritual. But one of the interesting things, the Redemptorists at Esopus, New York, the College of St. Alphonsus, the seminary, once a year on the day after Christmas, December 26th, they would get a bus or buses, and they would bus their seminarians into New York City as a treat to spend the day. And they would be brought there, and they would be given, since they had no money of their own, they would be given $5 and told to spend the day in New York City, and they had $5 that they could spend any way they wanted, and then in the evening would get back on the bus and go back to Esopus. So for many years, Gary and I would meet in New York on December 26th every year. I would drive over with my car. He would come down on the bus from Esopus. I decided that I would try to be equal, we would be fair with one another, so I would only bring $5 with me. And he would have his $5, and I would have my $5. Sometimes another Redemptorist seminarian named Bill Green would join us, and Bill would have his $5. And so the most we would ever have would be $15 for three guys to spend a whole day in New York City. Now, admittedly, this was the 60s and the early 70s, so things were a little bit cheaper, but $5 a person did not go very far in New York City even back then. So we would look for things to do that were either free or cheap. And we would go walking in Central Park. That was free, we could see that. We found some museums that at the time did not charge admission, so we were able to go and see that. We were able to go to the United Nations and walk through the building or the grounds. We were able to see some of the famous bridges. We went down to Greenwich Village one year. We did all sorts of things, and we would usually save the $5 and have dinner. and we would go to a restaurant and we'd be looking at the menu on the outside to try to see if we could afford to get something for less than $5 each, so we'd still have a little money to give as a tip to the waiter or waitress. And that's how I spent December 26th for many, many years. Gary and I usually, and sometimes Bill Green was able to join us. It was amazing how you try to make that $5 stretch, and we did the best we could. And the funny thing is, we had a great time. We had a beautiful time being with each other. It wasn't the money, it was the time together. Well, it's about time for Pascal to come down, and he brings us a message. And since we spent so much time talking about Mary, I thought we'd use a nice Latin message about Mary. Ave Maria, Gratia Plena. Hail Mary, full of grace. It's the opening words of the Hail Mary in Latin. Ave Maria, Gratia Plena. Hail Mary, full of grace. Good way to get ready for the month of May, the month in which we honor Mary. And so we'll be talking more about Mary in a few weeks down the road. We thank you much for joining us. Have a wonderful Easter season. This goes on for a few more weeks yet. Enjoy it. God bless.